Cornered and about to be caught, a millionaire's only salvation is an old car that screeches to a halt beside him. At the wheel, the unthinkable. A girl of only 6 years old. Desperate, he jumps in. That's when she slams the gas and yells the words that change everything. "Hold on tight, they're right behind us." What he doesn't know is that the chase is only the beginning of the mystery. The stench of burnt rubber and wet asphalt invaded Arthur Sterling's nostrils, an acrid cocktail his aseptic, meticulously planned life had never known. Every fiber of his Italian suit, now torn at the shoulder and stained with an indefinable grime, screamed a silent protest against the humiliation of this dead-end alley. The city's distant, cold neon lights painted the brick walls with sickly hues of red and blue, turning the shadows into lurking monsters. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed behind him, drawing closer, a funeral drum for the man who believed he had the world at his feet. The trap had been perfect. Marcus Thorne, his rival, with a smile that promised ruin, had lured him into a fake meeting. A checkmate executed not in a boardroom, but in the forgotten labyrinth of the metropolis. For the first time in decades, Arthur had no control. The money, the contacts, the ruthless logic that had built his tech empire were useless here. It was just him, his hammering heart, and the primal fear of the hunt. He pressed his back against the cold brick, breath caught in his throat. The knot in his stomach was familiar. An unwelcome visitor from a past he kept under lock and key. It was the same feeling of powerlessness that had assaulted him years ago, the day his younger sister, Helena, had been taken from him. He should have protected her, but he hadn't. He was just an ambitious young man, too blinded by his own plans to see the danger that circled her. That failure had forged him into the man he was today, a fortress of self-sufficiency, armored by power, so he would never feel weak again. And now, cornered like an animal, the fortress was crumbling. The footsteps stopped at the alley's entrance. Dark silhouettes cut against the streetlight. This was the end. His entire life, a meticulous climb to the top, would end in a puddle of filthy water, forgotten by all. A wave of despair washed over him, more overwhelming than the fear. He closed his eyes, the image of Helena's smile dancing in the darkness of his mind. It was then that the sound of an old, sputtering engine tore through the tense silence. A pair of yellowed headlights swept the alley, blinding the silhouettes and Arthur himself. An old car, a model he could barely identify, dented and its paint peeling, skidded violently to a stop just inches from where he stood. Smoke rose from the tires, adding its scent to the putrid symphony of the place. For a moment, Arthur thought it was just another nightmare, a hallucination brought on by panic. But then, the passenger window rolled down with a protesting squeal. In the driver's seat, barely reaching the top of the steering wheel, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her face was a small map of seriousness and determination, her large, dark eyes fixed on him, shining with an urgency that defied her age. She didn't look scared. She looked like she was in charge. "Mister, get in! Quick!" Her thin voice cut through the air, clear and imperative. Arthur stood frozen, his brain's logic trying to process the impossible scene. A rescue by a child. The men at the alley entrance began to move, recovering from their surprise. The choice was non-existent: trust the insanity or face the certainty of capture. With a final surge of survival instinct, he lunged for the car, yanked the door open, and dove into the passenger seat. The interior smelled of oil and something vaguely sweet, like stale bubble gum. As soon as the door slammed shut, the girl threw the car into gear with a jolt that shook the entire vehicle. She floored the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest. Turning her serious little face to him, her eyes still fixed on the road ahead, she said with a terrifying calm, "Hold on tight, they're right behind us." The old car protested every turn, its chassis groaning like a wounded animal. Arthur Sterling, the man who traveled in private jets and armored sedans with trained drivers, had his knuckles white from gripping the cracked dashboard. The city was a blur of lights and shadows outside, a hostile landscape the girl navigated with a mix of instinct and luck. She was so small she had to stretch to reach the pedals, her face inches from the wheel, her enormous eyes focused on the path with an intensity that bordered on frightening. They shot through an intersection at the last second, the sound of an angry horn fading behind them. "How do you know how to drive?" he finally managed to yell, his voice hoarse with panic. She didn't look at him. Keeping her attention on the narrow street, they turned on to next. "My dad taught me the basics before he left," she answered, her voice steady, but with a note of sadness that pierced Arthur's armor. The simplicity of that answer hit him harder than the chase itself. A loss, a lesson, an escape. They plunged into a maze of quiet residential streets. The girl, with a wisdom that didn't belong to her age, made a series of seemingly random turns before finally merging onto a main avenue, blending into the sparse late-night traffic. The headlights that had been pursuing them were gone. For now. "Where are we going?" she asked, the first sign of uncertainty since he'd gotten in the car. Arthur took a moment for his brain to retake command. He gave her the address of his penthouse, a place he considered impenetrable. They arrived at the glass and steel building, and the sight of the battered car idling in front of the luxurious lobby was so surreal. It felt like a dream. He guided her inside, ignoring the shocked look of the night security guard, and they rode the private elevator up in a heavy silence. The penthouse was a reflection of its owner, vast, cold, and impeccably minimalist. Designer furniture in shades of grey and black, glass walls revealing the city at his feet, a silence that echoed with loneliness. The girl stood in the middle of the room, a vibrant spot of color in her faded red coat, looking even smaller amidst the sterile vastness. He offered her a glass of water, his hands still shaking slightly. He needed answers. "Why? Why did you help me?" She took a small sip before speaking, her eyes scanning the room with cautious curiosity. "I saw your picture in the paper. For the money you gave to St. Clara's home." Arthur frowned. "The donation. A calculated PR move, a tax write-off, nothing more. I lived there for a while," she continued, "after my dad left. The man from the paper said you were a good man." She then explained that she spent her days at her father's old auto repair shop, where an old family friend, Al, let her stay. It was there she overheard the men, Marcus's goons, planning the ambush. They paid no attention to the quiet little girl in the corner, and she absorbed every word. "Did you? They said they were going to get the good man from the paper, get his money," she said with devastating simplicity. "I couldn't let them. Dad's car was almost ready. I took the keys." Arthur felt a chill. His safety, his life, was owed to a loyalty born from an act that had meant nothing to him. It was an equation his pragmatic mind couldn't solve. He looked at this child, a stranger who had risked everything for a face in a newspaper clipping. Before he could form a word of thanks, the sharp ping of an urgent notification echoed from his phone on the coffee table. The screen lit up, displaying a news headline. "Scandal. Tech genius Arthur Sterling. Fake zone kidnapping in bold stock manipulation ploy. Sources claim billionaire is on the run." The headline glowed on the phone screen, each word a lash. Arthur felt the floor disappear from under his feet. A fugitive, a manipulator, a villain. The speed with which Marcus had acted was terrifying, a calculated show of power designed to destroy him not just financially, but publicly. His name, his reputation, the one thing he had built as meticulously as his empire, was being dragged through the mud. He was the hunter who had become the hunted, and now the prey marked for slaughter in the eyes of the world. The girl, whose name he didn't even know yet, came closer and looked at the screen. Her eyes widened, not with fear, but with a pure, childish indignation. "That's a lie," she said, her voice louder than before. They were the bad guys. Her unwavering faith was a painful counterpoint to the complexity of the betrayal he faced. He wanted to believe the truth was that simple, but he knew that in Marcus's world, truth was just another commodity to be bought and sold. "They're not going to stop," Arthur whispered, more to himself. The penthouse, once a sanctuary of security, now felt like a glass cage, exposed for the whole city to see. Every window was an invitation for prying eyes, for paparazzi lenses, for Marcus's men. They had to leave. But where? His network of contacts, once vast and reliable, was now a minefield. Who was on his side? Who had already been bought by Marcus? Distrust, his constant companion, was now a poison that paralyzed every thought. He looked at the girl. What's your name?" he asked, his voice soft. "Lena," she replied. "Just Lena, simple and direct, like her. Lena, we're in danger, both of us." The understanding weighed on her face. She was no longer just an anonymous hero. By saving him, she had become entangled in his perilous fate. The phone buzzed again, this time a new alert from a different, more sensationalist news source. The photo was grainy, taken from a security camera, showing the moment he dove into the old car. Next to it, an enlarged and surprisingly clear image of Lena's face at the wheel. The caption was cruel. "Mysterious accomplice. Unidentified girl aids mogul. Arthur Sterling in his escape. A generous reward offered for information leading to her location, to ensure her safety. Ensure her safety." The phrase was a veiled threat, a way to turn every citizen into a potential bounty hunter. Marcus had made her a target. Arthur's panic gave way to a cold, protective fury, the same fury he should have felt for Helena. This time, he would not fail. "We have to go. Now," he said, the decision hardening his voice. He led her to his bedroom, grabbing a backpack and stuffing it with what he could, a laptop, some chargers, and the little cash he had in his wallet, about $400. It was an insulting sum for a man of his fortune, but right now, it was all he had. He tried to make an online transfer, a daily routine for moving millions. The transaction was blocked. He tried again. Access denied. A cold message appeared on the screen. "Your accounts have been temporarily frozen due to an ongoing investigation." Frozen, Marcus had cut his lifeline, his power, his identity. Money, the solution to all problems, was gone. Arthur looked out at the pulsing city below, a metropolis he once felt belonged to him. Now, it was enemy territory. He and Lena alone, with $400 in their pocket and the whole world against them. He glanced at the girl, who was watching him silently, clutching the strap of her small backpack with a teddy bear hanging from it. The vulnerability was total, crushing. They left through the service garage, avoiding the lobby, and got back into her father's old car. The engine sputtered before catching, the sound an echo of their precarious situation. As they drove away from the building that represented everything he had built and lost, Arthur felt a terrifying emptiness. The only place he could think of was a cheap roadside motel, an anonymous, forgotten place. As he paid for the room with crumpled bills, the sleepy clerk didn't even look up. For the first time in his life, Arthur Sterling was a nobody, and that invisibility was his only protection. The motel room smelled of cheap disinfectant and an old desperation ingrained in the stained carpet and threadbare curtains. It was a universe away from the Egyptian cotton and purified air of his penthouse. Arthur sat on the edge of the creaking bed, the room's silence amplified by the hum of an old mini-fridge. Lena, on the other hand, seemed almost at home. She explored the small space with genuine curiosity, testing the firmness of the other bed with a small bounce and peeking through the crack in the curtains at the line of trucks parked outside. To her, perhaps, this was just a different kind of adventure, a night away from her routine. To Arthur, It was rock bottom. The man who commanded an empire from a glass tower was now hiding in an anonymous box, counting the few bills he had left. The powerlessness was a bitter taste in his mouth. The same taste from years ago when he'd watched Helena's dreams fall apart and hadn't known how to pick up the pieces. He had sworn to himself that power and money would be his eternal shield, but the shield had shattered. In the days that followed, the dynamic between them inverted in a way Arthur could never have predicted. He, the strategist, the master of logic and control, was completely lost. His instincts were for boardrooms, not for survival on the run. It was Lena who taught him how to move in this new world. "Mister, don't walk so fast," she'd say, tugging the sleeve of his suit jacket, which he still wore for lack of other clothes. "People look at people who are in a hurry." She taught him how to pick the cheapest convenience stores, how to compare prices on bread and cans of tuna, how to find the public water fountains to refill their bottle. She moved with a street-smart resilience, a strength born of necessity that left him both in awe and heartbroken. He watched her bargain with a fruit vendor for 2 apples, using a smile that would disarm anyone, and realized that the skills he valued, contract negotiation, market analysis, were useless here. True strength resided in this small figure, in her ability to adapt and find beauty in small victories. One afternoon, desperation led him to make a mistake, hiding in the back of a public library. He used one of the computers to try and contact his lawyer, Benjamin, the one man he still believed he could trust. He sent a coded message, scheduling a call from a payphone. At the appointed time, his heart pounding, he dialed the number. Benjamin's voice was calm, professional, as always. Arthur explained the situation, the setup, the need to access the documents that would prove Marcus's fraudulent dealings. "Arthur, I'm so sorry," Benjamin said, and the tone of his voice made Arthur's blood run cold. "The files, there was an incident with the server, a security breach. Everything's been corrupted, there's nothing I can do." A security breach. The excuse was so flimsy, so insulting. Arthur almost laughed. Marcus had bought him. The last bridge to his old world had been burned. He hung up the phone slowly, the plastic receiver feeling like it weighed a ton. The final betrayal left him utterly alone. He returned to the motel, defeat etched into every line of his body. He found Lena sitting on the floor, drawing on a napkin with a piece of crayon she'd found in the parking lot. She looked up, and for a moment, the girl's mask of bravery fell. "We're lost, aren't we?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Arthur couldn't lie. He just nodded, and the weight of that truth seemed to suck all the air out of the small room. The night fell, cold and damp, wrapping the motel in a silence that seemed to mock the storm inside Arthur. The silent confession of his defeat hung between him and Lena, a thick, uncomfortable fog. He watched her as she got ready for bed, arranging her worn-out teddy bear on the pillow with motherly care. They were such small, childish gestures, contrasting violently with the gravity of their situation. The responsibility for her weighed on his shoulders like an anchor, dragging him down into the depths of his own fear. He wasn't a guardian, he was a failure. He had failed Helena, and now he was failing Lena. History was repeating itself, a vicious cycle of his own incompetence disguised as power. The air in the room grew heavy, and he felt a desperate need to escape, to breathe. "I'm going to get some water," he mumbled, a weak excuse for his flight. She just nodded, her large, expectant eyes following him to the door. Outside, the night air was sharp. He walked to the noisy ice machine at the end of the walkway, but didn't get any ice. He leaned his hands against the cold wall, his head bowed, his breath coming out in white clouds. Every detail of this night reminded him of another. The cold air, the lonely, distant lights, the sense that the world kept spinning, indifferent to his pain. A flashback hit him with the force of a punch. He was in a hospital, years ago. The lights were white and sterile. the air smelling of antiseptic. Helena was in a bed, pale and frail. She had gotten sick, a fever that kept climbing. He had been busy closing one of his first major deals, immersed in spreadsheets and projections. He ignored the first few calls, the worry in his mother's voice. When he finally arrived, it was too late. The illness had weakened her, leaving scars that would change her forever. The guilt consumed him. The powerlessness of seeing all his growing financial might be useless against a virus. He could buy companies, but he couldn't buy his sister's health. It was there he had promised himself he would never be powerless again. But here he was, years later, reliving the same nightmare. He went back to the room to find Lena coughing, a dry, weak sound that echoed in his ears like a fire alarm. She was curled up under the thin blanket, her face flushed and her eyes bright with fever. Panic, cold and familiar, seized him. Not again. He couldn't let it happen again. He touched her forehead. It was burning. He looked at his nearly empty wallet. There was no money for a hospital, not even for a private clinic. His elite doctors, the best in the country, were a phone call away in his other life. But in this reality, they might as well have been on another planet. The only option was the 24-hour drugstore he'd seen on the side of the road. He took his last few bills, the money that was supposed to last for a few more days of food and shelter, and ran into the night. In the drugstore, under the fluorescent lights that made everything look pale and sickly, he stammered the symptoms to the sleepy pharmacist. Feeling like an imposter, he bought children's fever reducer and a cough syrup. The change, he received a pile of insignificant coins. When he returned, he found Lena shivering. He carefully gave her the medicine, wiping her face with a damp washcloth. The touch of her hot skin transported him back to that hospital room, to Helena's cold hand in his. The grief, guilt, and fear he had dammed up for years finally broke through. Sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark motel room, watching the girl's labored breathing, Arthur Sterling began to cry. A silent, heaving sob from someone who hadn't allowed himself this weakness in a very long time. "I'm so scared," he whispered into the darkness, the confession tearing a hole in his soul. "I can't lose you too." The night dragged on in a tense vigil. Arthur didn't sleep a wink, alternating between checking Lena's temperature with the back of his hand and pacing the confined space of the room. Every cough from her was a needle in his chest, every feverish moan an echo of his past failures. The whispered confession in the dark had left him exposed, stripped of his pragmatic armor. The vulnerability was terrifying, but strangely liberating. For the first time in years, he wasn't analyzing a problem. He was feeling it in its entirety. Fear wasn't a variable to be mitigated, but a current that was sweeping him away. He sat in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed, watching her sleep. The moonlight, filtered through the thin curtains, softened the girl's features, accentuating the innocence he felt he had put at risk. Who was he to drag her into his chaos? She had saved him, and her reward had been danger, flight, and sickness. The guilt was a physical weight, bowing his shoulders. As dawn broke, Lena's fever began to recede. Her breathing became more regular, and the feverish color in her cheeks gave way to a healthy pallor. When she finally opened her eyes, they were clear and focused. The relief that flooded Arthur was so intense it made him dizzy. She sat up, still weak, and looked at him. Her eyes, which seemed able to see through all his defenses, settled on his tired face. "You didn't sleep," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. He just shook his head. "I was worried," he admitted, the simplicity of the phrase loaded with the weight of the previous night. She gave him a small smile, a gesture that warmed the cold room more than any heater. In that moment, something shifted. The dynamic of protector and protected, of responsible adult and vulnerable child, dissolved into something more equal. His confession of fear, his desperate care during the night, had created a bond, a fragile bridge of trust over the chasm of despair that surrounded them. He was no longer just the Mr. she had saved. He was Arthur, a scared man who needed her as much as she needed him. Recovered but still not strong enough for long walks, Lena spent the day in bed, flipping through a crossword puzzle magazine left by a previous guest. Arthur, feeling the need to do something, anything, decided to examine the car. The old vehicle that had been their salvation was now their only valuable possession, their only means of escape. He opened the hood, though he knew nothing about mechanics. The engine was a mess of wires and oily parts. Frustrated, he moved to the trunk. It was nearly empty, save for a jack, a spare tire, and a large red toolbox, rusted at the edges. He opened it, expecting to find screwdrivers and wrenches. The tools were there, worn with use, but something else caught his eye. A poorly disguised false bottom under a metal tray. With his heart starting to beat faster, he pried the tray out. Underneath, there were no secret compartments with weapons or money, but something far more mundane and perhaps far more valuable. An old leather-bound ledger and several spiral notebooks filled with notes. He took the ledger and went back to the room. Lena looked up from her magazine, curious. "What's that?" she asked. "I think it belonged to your dad," Arthur said, sitting next to her on the bed and opening the book to the first page. The handwriting was firm and precise. They were service records, dates, names, and amounts. At first, it all seemed normal: oil changes, brake repairs, engine tune-ups. But as he flipped further, the entries began to change. Names were replaced with initials. Service descriptions became vague, almost coded, and one name, or rather, one initial, began to appear with alarming frequency. T. Next to T, there were notes about compartment modifications, suspension reinforcement for extra cargo, and long-range radio installation. These were not services an ordinary mechanic would perform. Arthur felt a shiver run down his spine. He turned another page and saw an entry that made his blood run cold. The date was a week before his ambush. Next to the initial T was the license plate number of the car that had taken him to the fake meeting, and a single note: check brakes and prep for disposal. Lena's father wasn't just a mechanic. He was Marcus Thorne's mechanic. The fog of confusion clouded Arthur's mind. Lena's father, the man whose memory she revered, was complicit with Marcus. The idea was a poison, threatening to contaminate the one pure thing left in this disaster: Lena's innocence. He snapped the book shut, as if he could contain the toxic truth within its worn covers. "It's nothing," he lied, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "Just work notes." But Lena wasn't a fool. She had seen the change in his face, the way his shoulders tensed. She held out her small hand. "Let me see. It's Dad's." Arthur's hesitation lasted only a second. To deny her this would be another form of betrayal. He handed her the book, his heart heavy. She traced her fingers over her father's handwriting, a reverent touch. She didn't understand the coded notes, but she recognized the names of old customers, the descriptions of cars she had seen in the shop. "He was the best," she whispered, a childish pride in her voice. "He could fix anything." Arthur watched her, and his logical mind, his greatest tool, began to work in a new way. He was no longer analyzing a balance sheet, but the life of a man contained in a book. Why would a talented mechanic work for a man like Marcus? Why risk everything? He picked up one of the spiral notebooks. It was filled with sketches, engine diagrams, calculations. It seemed like a technical journal, but in between the notes were stray phrases: thoughts, hospital debt, no way out. They know about Elle, have to protect her. The truth hit him like a wave. Lena's father wasn't a willing accomplice. He was trapped, coerced, forced by debt and threats. Marcus had him by the throat, and Lena's safety was the leash. The ledger wasn't proof of his guilt, but a silent cry for help, an insurance policy. "Lena," Arthur said, his voice soft but urgent, "your dad, he was very careful. very detailed. He wrote everything down. He opened the ledger again, this time with a new perspective. These codes, the initials, they're not to hide, they're to record. It's a map. He and Lena spent the afternoon poring over the papers. Arthur's analytical mind, combined with Lena's fragmented memories of the cars and customers she'd seen at the shop, began to piece together the puzzle. The extra cargo corresponded to dates of major smuggling busts reported in the news. The license plates linked Marcus to a network of illegal operations far larger than Arthur had ever imagined. Lena's father, the quiet, indebted mechanic, had methodically documented Marcus's criminal ascent. He was building a case, brick by brick, hoping to one day find a way out. But death, or his leaving, as Lena called it, had come first. Suddenly, Lena went quiet, her pinky finger tracing a wiring diagram in the notebook. Her eyes went wide. "Dad always said one thing," she said, her voice distant, as if pulling the memory from a deep place. He said, "Honey, the most important answers aren't in the engines, but in the papers kept in the toolbox." That was it. The phrase that sounded like fatherly advice was, in fact, an instruction, a key. He wasn't just recording Marcus's crimes. He was leaving a legacy, a weapon for his daughter. And by a twist of fate, that weapon had fallen into the hands of the one man with enough motive to use it. Arthur looked at the pile of papers. They weren't just running anymore. They weren't victims. They had the proof. The tide was turning, but the proof was useless if it couldn't be used. Going to the police was too risky. Marcus surely had contacts inside. They needed someone on the outside, someone with the power to expose the truth, someone who couldn't be bought. Arthur's mind raced through his contact list, dismissing one after another, and then a name surfaced, a name he despised. A relentless and incorruptible investigative journalist who had once tried to expose one of his most aggressive corporate takeovers. He had crushed her publicly, humiliated her. She hated him, and that was exactly why he could trust her. He picked up the burner phone he'd bought with his last few coins. He knew who he had to contact, and he knew she would relish the chance to see him crawl. Her name was Helena. The irony was so cruel that Arthur almost laughed, a dry, humorless sound that died in his throat. Helena Vargas, a journalist whose tenacity was rivaled only by her integrity, two qualities that Arthur, in his corporate world, had always considered weaknesses to be exploited. Now, they were his only hope. Finding her contact information wasn't hard. Her professional number was public. The difficulty was what to say, how to build a bridge over the chasm of animosity he himself had created. He took the phone to the corner of the room, away from Lena, as if to shield her from the toxicity of the impending conversation. He took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang 3 times before a crisp, impatient female voice answered, "Vargas." No pleasantries, no fluff. "Helena, it's Arthur Sterling." There was a silence on the other end of the line, so heavy Arthur could feel the shock and suspicion from miles away. "If this is some kind of prank, it's in very poor taste," she finally said, her voice frigid. "It's not a prank," Arthur said, struggling to keep his voice steady, to not let the desperation seeping into him show. "I need your help. I'm in trouble. Serious trouble." Her laugh was short and bitter. "Oh, the great Arthur Sterling needs help. The man who tried to ruin my career because I dared to question his shark tactics. Let me guess. You need me to write a puff piece about how the market is being unfair to you?" The sarcasm was a razor. He deserved it. He deserved every ounce of her contempt. "No, it's about Marcus Thorne," he said, playing his only card. "I have proof that can destroy him, and it can clear my name." Another silence, this time an interested one. Helena Vargas might hate him, but she was a real journalist, the scent of a big story, especially one involving one of her old adversaries, was irresistible. "What kind of proof?" she asked, her tone now purely professional. I can't say over the phone. It's too dangerous. We need to meet. He could hear her typing on the other end, probably checking the latest news on him, connecting the dots. The news says you're on the run, that you've kidnapped a child. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and raw. The news is lying. Marcus is controlling the narrative. The girl, she saved me, and now he's hunting her too. That's why I need you. She's not a part of any of this. The mention of Lena seemed to shift the tone. Perhaps the journalist behind her hard facade had a soft spot for injustice against the innocent. Where, she said, her decision made, and how do I know this isn't a trap? You don't, Arthur answered honestly. You'll have to trust me, or at least trust your gut that this is the story of a lifetime. He proposed a meeting in a public crowded place, a suburban mall food court the next day. It was a risk, but standing still was an even greater one. After he hung up, the adrenaline gave way to a profound exhaustion. He turned back to Lena, who was watching him with a quiet wisdom. Who was that? She asked. A woman who might be able to help us. But she doesn't like me. Lena tilted her head, processing this. Sometimes people don't like you at first, she said, with the simplicity of a 6-year-old philosopher. But if you're nice, they change their minds. Arthur wished the world were that simple. The truth was, he hadn't been nice. He had been cruel and arrogant. And now, his future and Lena's depended on this woman's ability to see past the monster he had created. That night, the fear of the meeting was almost as great as the fear of being caught. He was about to place himself in the hands of his enemy, offering her not just the biggest story of her career, but also the perfect chance for revenge. He could only hope that her desire for the truth was greater than her desire to see him fall. The air in the mall was artificially cold and smelled of a mixture of buttery popcorn and cheap perfume. For Arthur, accustomed to environments engineered for maximum comfort and exclusivity, the sensory chaos was overwhelming. Children shrieked and ran, teenagers clustered in loud groups, and the constant hum of 1,000 conversations created a cacophony that grated on his frayed nerves. He and Lena sat at a plastic table in the far corner of the food court, a strategic spot that offered a clear view of the entrances. Lena, a hood pulled over her hair, was eating an ice cream cone Arthur had bought with some of their last few coins, the treat a small moment of normalcy in the madness. Arthur didn't eat. His stomach was a tight knot of anxiety. Every person who walked by was a potential enemy, every glance in his direction a possible threat. He felt exposed, vulnerable, like a fish out of water. Helena Vargas arrived exactly on time. She was, as he remembered, tall, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wore simple jeans and a leather jacket, blending in with a casual ease Arthur envied. She spotted him, and their eyes met for an instant across the food court. There was no recognition or sympathy in her gaze, only a cool, professional assessment. She approached the table and sat in the empty chair without a word, placing her bag on the floor beside her. Her eyes went from Arthur to Lena and back again, one eyebrow slightly arched. "So, this is the famous accomplice," she said, her voice low but cutting. Arthur felt a surge of protective anger. "Quiet, her name is Lena, and she's a victim, just like me." Helena looked unimpressed. "Everyone's a victim in their own story, Sterling. Show me what you've got." With trembling hands, Arthur pulled the ledger and one of Lena's father's notebooks from his backpack and pushed them across the table. Her father was Marcus's mechanic. He was forced to work for him. He documented everything: dates, license plates, modifications to vehicles used for smuggling. "It's all in here, the proof that links Marcus to a criminal network." Helena opened the ledger, her expert eyes scanning the pages rapidly. She wasn't a mechanic, but she understood investigation. She took out her phone, snapping photos of a few pages, and began cross-referencing information with something in her own database. The silence stretched. broken only by the din of the food court and the soft sound of Lena scraping the bottom of her ice cream cup. Arthur watched Helena's face, searching for any sign, any tell. Her expression was a mask of concentration. Finally, she looked up, and for the first time, Arthur saw something other than hostility in her eyes, a flicker of professional excitement. "This is substantial," she admitted grudgingly. "Some of these plates match vehicles that were reported stolen and then mysteriously recovered months later. The police never dug too deep." She looked at him, her gaze sharp. "This is good. It's a start, but it's not enough to take down a man like Marcus. He has the best lawyers, judges in his pocket. He'll claim they're forgeries, that you planted them. We need something more, something irrefutable." Arthur's heart sank. He had bet everything on those books. He had nothing else. The hope that had begun to bloom instantly withered. "There is nothing else," he said, his voice a whisper of defeat. He looked at Lena, who was now staring at him, her large eyes reflecting his own disappointment. It was then that the girl spoke, her voice clear amid the noise. "Yes, there is," she said, looking at Helena. "There's the toolbox." Helena frowned. "What about the toolbox?" "Dad always said," Lena continued, "that the most important tools don't make noise. They record." A sudden silence seemed to isolate their table from the rest of the food court. Lena's words hung in the air, heavy with a meaning neither Arthur nor Helena could fully grasp. "Record," Helena repeated, leaning forward, her attention now fully on the girl. Arthur looked at Lena, his mind racing to decipher the riddle. Tools that record. He remembered her father's shop, a place he only knew through Lena's descriptions. It was a sanctuary of grease and metal, the domain of a man who trusted machines more than people. "Lena, what did your dad mean by that?" Arthur asked gently. Lena wrinkled her nose, a habit she had when she was concentrating. He had a special screwdriver, his favorite. It was silver and fatter than the others. He always left it on the top tray of the box. He said it was his listening key. Listening key. The phrasing was childish, but the implication was explosive. A bug, a disguised recording device. Could it be? It was a desperate, risky move worthy of a cornered man. The excitement on Helena's face was palpable. "Where is this toolbox now?" she asked, her voice urgent. "In the trunk of the car," Arthur answered, hope surging back with overwhelming force. The car was in a public parking garage a few blocks away, the safest place he could think to leave it. "We need to get it. Now," Helena said, already standing. "It's too risky for us all to go back there. If anyone's watching..." "I'll go," Arthur said immediately. "You stay here with Lena." Helena sized him up, a mixture of distrust and necessity in her eyes. "Sterling, if this is a waste of time, or worse, a trap..." "It's not," he cut her off, the conviction in his voice surprising even himself. "I trust her." He looked at Lena, and the steadfastness in the girl's gaze was all the confirmation he needed. "Stay with her. Keep her safe. I'll be back in 20 minutes. The walk to the parking garage was the longest of Arthur's life. Every corner seemed to hold a threat, every passing car a potential pursuer. Paranoia, his old acquaintance, returned in full force. He forced himself to breathe deeply, to focus on the task. Lena's safety, his own freedom, it all depended on what he would find in that rusty toolbox. He reached the car, his heart hammering against his ribs. He used the key, and the trunk popped open with a protesting groan. The red box was there, just as he'd left it. He grabbed it. It was heavy, solid, a rusty treasure chest. He didn't open it there. The risk was too great. With the box tucked under his arm, he retraced his steps, moving as quickly as he could without drawing attention. When he returned to the food court, Helena and Lena were exactly where he'd left them. Lena was finishing coloring a drawing on a napkin. Helena looked like a wound-up clock spring, ready to leap at any moment. He put the box on the table with a dull thud. The three of them leaned in. Arthur flipped the rusty latches. The top tray was there, filled with assorted tools, and among them a silver screwdriver, slightly thicker than the others, exactly as Lena had described. There were no visible buttons, no lights. It looked like an ordinary tool. Helena picked it up with the care of someone handling a relic. She examined it, her experienced fingers searching for anything unusual. At the base of the handle, almost invisible, was a tiny slot, no bigger than a pinhead. Using the tip of a paperclip from her bag, she pressed something inside the slot. A faint click sounded, and the base of the handle popped loose, revealing a minuscule USB port. "Unbelievable," Helena whispered, a genuine, admiring smile on her face. He was a genius. She pulled a slim laptop from her bag, plugged in the screwdriver, and in seconds, a folder of audio files appeared on the screen. There were dozens of them, each labeled with a date. The date of the most recent file was 2 days before Lena's father's departure. The file was titled simply, "Marcus' Final Plan." Helena didn't hesitate. With a surgeon's precision, she plugged a pair of earbuds into the laptop, shutting out the noise of the food court. Her eyes closed for an instant as she hit play. Arthur watched every micro-expression on her face, his heart beating a frantic rhythm. Their future was contained in that tiny audio file. The seconds dragged on like hours. He saw Helena's jaw clench. Her brows drew together in a hard line. Then her eyes flew open, wide with a mixture of horror and journalistic triumph. She pulled out one earbud and offered it to Arthur. "Oh, you need to hear this." He took the earbud, his palms sweating. The voice that came out of the tiny speaker was unmistakable. It was Marcus Thorne, calm, arrogant, and devoid of any emotion. And he was talking to Lena's father. "The trap is set," Marcus was saying in the recording, the audio quality surprisingly clear. "Sterling is predictable. His arrogance is his greatest weakness. He'll come to the warehouse meeting, expecting a negotiation. My men will take him." There was a pause, and then the tired voice of Lena's father. "This is insane, Marcus. He's too powerful." Marcus's laugh was a chilling sound. "His power comes from money and public opinion, and I'm going to take both from him. The media is already primed. As soon as he disappears, the fake kidnapping story will break, his stock will plummet, I'll buy up everything for pennies on the dollar, and when he finally resurfaces, he'll be a disgraced criminal. I'm not just going to beat him, I'm going to erase him." The recording continued, with Marcus detailing every step of the plan with horrifying precision, from the freezing of Arthur's accounts to the smear campaign. It was the full confession, the architecture of his ruin, narrated by the architect himself. Arthur pulled out the earbud, feeling a cold dread. It was worse than he'd imagined. This wasn't just a business play. It was a personal, methodical, and cruel destruction. He looked at Lena. She didn't understand the complexities of what was said, but she had recognized Marcus's voice. Her eyes filled with a silent rage. She took Arthur's hand, a gesture of solidarity that anchored him. In that moment, he understood the depth of her father's bravery. The man hadn't just been recording a crime. He had been facing down the monster. Armed with nothing but a screwdriver, Helena was already packing up her equipment, her mind working a mile a minute. "This changes everything," she said, her voice low and tense. "This isn't just proof, it's a nuclear weapon. We can't go to the police. Marcus has moles everywhere. We need to leak this, but we have to do it right, from somewhere secure, where I can write the story and drop everything at once. My home and office are out. They have to be watched." The food court, once an anonymous haven, suddenly felt like the most dangerous place on earth. Arthur felt a prickle on the back of his neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. He scanned the area and saw him, near one of the exits, a man in a suit, talking on his phone. The man wasn't looking at them, but his posture was tense, alert. It could be paranoia, or it could be the end of the line. "And we have to get out of here, now," Helena said, echoing Arthur's thoughts. "My car is in the underground parking. It's the safest place we can go right now." They stood in one synchronized movement, abandoning the remnants of their meal. Helena took Lena's other hand, forming a small human chain of fugitives. They descended the escalator to the parking garage, the air growing colder, the silence broken only by the echo of their footsteps. The garage was a labyrinth of concrete and pillars, poorly lit by humming fluorescent bulbs. Helena's car, a discreet sedan, was just a few yards away. For an instant, relief washed over Arthur. They'd made it. They were almost safe. Helena pressed the button on her key fob, and the car's lights flashed, and that's when all hell broke loose. High beams flashed on in front of them and behind them, blocking both ends of the aisle. Two black, identical SUVs materialized from the shadows. Doors opened, and men in dark suits got out, moving with a silent, menacing efficiency. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. Trapped. No escape. Time seemed to slow down. The glare of the headlights turned the parking garage into a cruel stage, pinning them in its merciless spotlight. The silhouettes of the men drew closer, a circle of predators closing in on their prey. The icy panic Arthur had felt in the alley days ago returned with overwhelming force. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just for his life. He looked at Lena, who was trembling between him and Helena, her small face pale under the harsh light. He felt her hand tighten in his, a small point of heat in the coldness of his fear. The image of Helena, his sister, frail and sick in a hospital bed, superimposed itself over Lena. The same vulnerability, the same innocence in peril. A primal fury, stronger than fear, surged from the depths of his soul. He would not be powerless, not this time. "Get in the car," he yelled at Helena, his voice a raw, unrecognizable sound. He put himself between them and the advancing men, using his own body as a shield. Helena, shaking off the initial shock, reacted. She pushed Lena into the back seat of the car and dove into the driver's side. The engine roared to life. The men hesitated, surprised by the sudden resistance. Arthur seized the second of hesitation. "Stay back!" he yelled, taking a step forward, pure adrenaline pumping through his veins. It was a suicidal bluff, one unarmed man against a small army, but his unexpected ferocity gave them pause. "Helena, go!" he commanded, never taking his eyes off the men. The squeal of tires echoed on the concrete as Helena wrenched the wheel, spinning the car 180 degrees. Instead of attempting the obvious escape up the blocked ramp, she accelerated in the opposite direction, towards a solid concrete wall at the end of the aisle. For a terrifying instant, Arthur thought she had panicked, but then he saw it. A small sign, almost invisible in the gloom. "Service exit, do not block." It was a narrow passage, closed off by a flimsy metal gate. Arthur ran and threw himself into the passenger seat at the last second, slamming the door. "Hold on!" Helena shouted. The car hit the gate with a deafening shriek of twisting metal. For an agonizing moment, the vehicle seemed to stop, caught. But then, with one final protest, the gate gave way, and they burst out into a steep, dark service ramp that spat them out into an alley on the other side of the block. Helena didn't slow down. She drove with a skill and daring Arthur would never have imagined, weaving through traffic, running red lights. Behind them, the black SUVs emerged from the garage, their sirens now blaring, an illegal addition to clear their path. The chase was on again, more desperate than ever. "They're not giving up!" Arthur yelled, looking in the rearview mirror. "We can't go to my place! We can't go anywhere!" Helena shot back, her brow furrowed in concentration. "They followed us. They knew I was there. Someone tipped them off." The betrayal was a spreading poison. It was Lena who broke the stalemate. "The shop," she said from the back seat, her voice small but firm. "Dad's shop." Arthur and Helena exchanged a look. "It's too obvious. They could be waiting there," Arthur said. "No," Lena said. "There's a back door, in the junkyard alley. Dad used it when he didn't want anyone to see him. He showed me. It was a gamble. The last one they had. Helena made a sharp turn, changing course. The shop was in the oldest, most industrial part of the city, a maze of abandoned warehouses and cobblestone streets. It was the perfect territory for a final ambush. They reached the junkyard alley, the car skidding on the loose dirt. Helena killed the engine, and the ensuing silence was deafening. In the distance, the sound of sirens grew closer. They scrambled out of the car and ran towards the shop. The back door was exactly where Lena said, hidden behind a stack of old tires. It was locked. "Yeah, damn it," Helena cursed. But Lena held out her hand to Arthur. In her palm was a small bronze key, which had been hanging on a cord around her neck the whole time. Her father's last key. Arthur took it, his hand trembling, and fitted it into the lock. The door clicked open. They slipped into the darkness of the shop and locked it behind them, just as the headlights of the SUVs flooded the alley with blinding light. The darkness inside the shop was absolute. A thick blackness that smelled of oil, grease, and cold metal. The only sounds were their own ragged breathing and the muffled hammering of their hearts. Outside, in the alley, the voices of Marcus's men were now clear, followed by the sharp, metallic sound of someone working on the lock of the back door. They were trapped, cornered in a tomb of concrete and steel. Helena fumbled for her phone, the small screen illuminating their faces with a ghostly light. "No signal," she whispered, frustration raw in her voice. "I can't upload the file. I can't call anyone." Panic began to creep in again, a cold snake coiling in Arthur's stomach. They had the weapon, but they were trapped inside the enemy's fortress with no way to fire it. The men outside began to pound on the door, the dull thuds echoing through the vast space of the shop. "There's another way." Lena's voice cut through the tension, small but certain. "Dad showed me, for emergencies." She led them through the darkness, her small hand holding tight to Arthur's, navigating the maze of tools and car parts with a familiarity only she possessed. They stopped in front of what felt like a large metal plate on the floor. "The pit," she said. "Dad said the pit is the safest way." Arthur and Helena knelt. It was the cover for an old maintenance pit, heavy and caked with dust. Together, they used all their strength to slide it aside, revealing a metal ladder that descended into blackness. "Does this lead to the street?" Helena asked, hope returning to her voice. "No," Lena answered. "It leads to the storm drain. It comes out in the alley behind the old textile mill, 2 blocks from here." The genius of Lena's father was breathtaking. A normal mechanic had a maintenance pit. A cornered man had built an escape route. A plan began to form in Arthur's mind, clear and sharp. "Helena, you go," he said, his voice filled with an authority he hadn't felt in days. "Take the laptop, get out through the tunnel, find a safe place and release the recording. Tell the whole story." "What about you two?" she asked, looking from Arthur to Lena. "I'm not leaving you here." "You have to," Arthur insisted. "This is our only chance. The recording is the priority. We'll create a diversion, something to draw them to the front of the shop, away from the alley. We'll buy you the time you need." Helena hesitated, the conflict visible on her face. This was no longer just a story for her. It had become personal, but she was a professional. She knew he was right. She nodded. Arthur's diversion was dangerous and loud. In the center of the shop, a hydraulic lift held up the carcass of an old car, an abandoned project. "When I hit this button, the lift is going to fail," he explained. "The noise will be deafening. It'll sound like the roof is caving in. They'll come running to the main entrance." He handed Helena a small flashlight he'd found on a workbench. "Go now, get ready. When you hear the noise, run." Helena looked at Arthur, and for the first time, he saw respect in her eyes. "Sterling, good luck. Just publish the truth." "Vargas," he replied. She climbed down the ladder and disappeared into the darkness. Arthur scooped Lena into his arms, holding her tight. "Close your eyes and cover your ears, sweetheart. This is going to be loud." He walked to the lift's control panel, his hand hovering over the large red emergency release button. Outside, the sound of the back door beginning to give way started. With one final breath, he slammed his fist on the button. A high-pitched hydraulic whine was followed by a cataclysmic crash as tons of metal hit concrete. The floor shook. Nearby car alarms shrieked to life. Confused shouts came from the front of the shop. The diversion had worked. Arthur ran with Lena to the darkest corner of the space, hiding behind a pile of old engine blocks as the front door was forced open and the flashlight beams of Marcus's men cut through the dust and chaos. The next few minutes stretched into a tense eternity. Hidden with Lena in his arms, Arthur barely dared to breathe. The smell of dust and oil was suffocating. The flashlight beams danced around the shop, slicing through the darkness like blades, passing inches from their hiding spot. He could hear the men yelling at each other, confused and angry about the noise and the mess. They were searching for them, sweeping every corner, knocking over shelves. The sound of metal on concrete echoing like gunshots. Lena trembled in his arms, but remained silent, her face buried in his shoulder, a little warrior to the end. Arthur whispered reassurances in her ear, though they were as much for himself. He didn't know what would happen if they were found, but for the first time, he didn't feel fear. He felt a strange calm, the acceptance of someone who had done the right thing, regardless of the cost. He had given Helena the chance she needed. He had given Lena the chance for justice for her father. It was enough. Suddenly, a different sound cut through the chaos. A high-pitched, insistent chirping coming from the pockets of the men hunting them. It was their cell phones, all going off at once. A confused silence followed, then muffled, urgent voices. "What? On the internet? What do you mean?" "It's the boss's voice. Fall back. The plan's changed. Fall back now!" The beams of light stopped searching and converged on the exit. Hurried footsteps, car doors slamming, tires squealing on asphalt, and then silence. A deep, profound silence, broken only by the drip of oil from a damaged engine. They were gone. Helena had done it. Arthur remained motionless for a long moment, unable to believe it. Slowly, he stood up, his legs shaky, and peered over the pile of engines. The shop was empty, a battlefield after the war. He finally allowed the tension to leave him, his whole body trembling with relief. "It's over, Lena," he whispered. "I think it's over." The final scene takes place months later, on a sunny autumn day. The story had exploded. The recording, combined with Helena Vargas's meticulously reported article, had been devastating. Marcus Thorne was arrested, his criminal network dismantled, his assets frozen. Arthur Sterling's name was cleared, his reputation restored, and his fortune returned. But the man who came back from the abyss was not the same one who had been pushed into it. He wasn't in his sterile penthouse, nor was he in a boardroom negotiating the next big deal. He was at the auto shop, the same shop where he had hidden, which now gleamed with a fresh coat of paint and clean windows. He had bought it and transformed it into the Helena and Michael Foundation, named for his sister and Lena's father, a center for at-risk youth, teaching them mechanics, coding, and above all, giving them a safe place. Lena, now officially his adopted daughter, was by his side. She no longer wore worn-out clothes, but a custom-made miniature mechanic's jumpsuit stained with grease. She was patiently teaching Arthur how to change the oil on the old car that had brought them together, the same car that was now beautifully restored, its paint shining in the sun. "No, Uncle Arthur, you have to turn it the other way," she corrected him with the seriousness of an expert instructor. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes, something his old life rarely saw. He was no longer the cold, isolated man, protected by an armor of money. The armor had been broken, and in its place, he had found something infinitely stronger, human connection. He looked at the car, at the shop, at Lena's smiling face. The ache of powerlessness, the secret wound that had haunted him for so long, had finally healed. It hadn't been cured by power or wealth, but by the unconditional love and extraordinary courage of his little guardian. He finally understood that true strength wasn't in never needing help, but in having it, and in giving it, and in this noisy, hopeful garage. He had found a purpose, a family, and finally, himself.